Hey guys, Michael here for Wasatch Fitness Academy and Asymptote Coaching. Today's topic, let's talk about fat loss and its relationship to performance. A couple of ideas of whether or not you need to be focusing on weight loss and on fat loss or mass loss. And then secondly, a handful of rules to make the most of fat loss in the midst of performance training. So first and foremost, there are a couple of myths that I think are around for fat loss for performance athletes that are worth talking about and potentially deconstructing, at least in some cases. So first and foremost is this idea that fat loss is absolutely essential, that losing a little bit of body fat is going to be this huge performance boosting thing for an endurance athlete. And this is not necessarily true. It's true in certain cases. And if you are a competitive performance and a competitive endurance athlete, you're running marathons competitively, you're looking at Olympic time trials, you're trying to qualify for a very high-end Boston, marathon qualifying time, it is probably worth doing some research and investigating what is the average body fat percentage for people of your age range, your gender for that event. And the data might be hard to come by. You may need to kind of do some Facebook stalking and look at some profile photos to come up with an idea. And because the reality is that if there's a body type that tends to dominate within a sport, you are probably going to be better at that sport if you are close to that body type. And so again, this is very much if we're in a competitive performance, you are being paid for that work, then by all means, or you care that desperately about that particular result, then by all means do that. And if that's the case, then in reality, you should already be working with someone who can give you detailed nutritional coaching advice. The rest of this video is almost going to be a restatement of some stuff that you probably already know. And if not, if this is early in your journey, then great. And I'm really glad that you're here and the rest of this is going to be valuable. But you're going to actually need some guidance that's much, much more specific than what I'm going to get into in this particular video. But for most of the rest of us, the value of losing body fat in terms of performance is going to be minimal to maybe none. If you weigh 5 pounds less on a skin track when you're climbing in the backcountry to go skiing, will that 5 pounds make a difference? Absolutely, right? It's not that it won't, but is that 5 pounds gonna be the thing that makes or breaks you? Not so much, right? Very often, athletes are gonna get a better bang for their buck, a better return on investment in getting stronger, improving their technique and improving their endurance, and then worrying about 5 pounds of body fat. Likewise, if you're out mountain biking, do pounds on the body matter? Absolutely, right? And it's always it's sometimes easier to lose some weight off of the body than it is expensive to pay to, upgrade some bolts to titanium so you can save a few grams, right? Yeah, arguably dealing with body fat makes a lot more sense. However, there is going to be a return on investment because losing body fat does require requires a little bit of a cost-benefit analysis, right? So the first thing I encourage you to do is actually consider what is the benefit of losing body fat. A lot of times, if you're simply looking to do some pull-ups, right? A pull-up is a pure body weight exercise. It is functionally a measure of your strength relative to your body mass. If you want to do more pull-ups, could you drop your body mass? Absolutely. And will it make pull-ups easier? Sure. But if you're working to your first pull-up or your first 5 pull-ups or your first 10 pull-ups, then unless you're within another category that we'll talk about in a second, getting stronger and getting better at pull-ups is actually going to be a better trip. It's going to be a shorter route to that, right? Losing fat, you're not getting 5 pounds more of pulling strength in a pull-up or getting better at a pull-up is actually a shorter, easier, and probably more beneficial route than trying to lose the 5 pounds to make the pull-ups 5 pounds easier. There is, of course, an exception for this, which is that if you are in a category where there is a medical health necessity to lose body fat, there are costs of carrying around excess body fat, excuse me, and we can talk about, we can debate where these ranges are, but general good guidelines are, if men are north of 18 to 20% body fat, we probably worry a little bit about health and inflammation markers. If women are above like 20 to 25% body fat, some of those same concerns. And if we're outside of that range, right? If we're at that higher levels of body fat, it doesn't mean you're dying. It doesn't mean you're like doomed, but it does mean that there's probably some health value of bringing body fat down a little bit. So it's worth it for that. And when we talk about health, we do mean cardiovascular health, but also in terms of sport performance. If you are carrying around excess body fat, that body fat will release inflammatory chemicals and hormones and markers into the bloodstream. And that inflammation is actually anti-recovery for muscles and tendons and ligaments. Right? So in other words, carrying excess body fat reduces the quality of your recovery. So there is value in losing body fat for that perspective. But again, it's not pure performance, but it's so that we can get the most out of our training. And again, it's specifically within certain ranges, right? If you're walking around at 15% body fat, putting a lot of effort into losing body fat is probably not going to be the biggest performance boost. If you want to do it because you like the aesthetic of it, you like the aesthetic of being leaner because the physique is important to you, by all means, like take that. And the rest of this video will kind of speak to how to think about it. However, if you're in that category where there's some real health concerns or performance concerns related to recovery, again, the rest of this video is going to give you some ideas. There's one more thought about losing body fat, which is that if you are participating in a high impact sport, and for our purposes, what I mean by impact is really running, then you have this load that goes through the body into the ground pushes back, Newton's laws and all, equal and opposite forces. And if you're carrying excess body mass, then there is a cost to that. And maybe losing some body fat can be helpful for that. The concern is always going to be that we preferentially want to lose body fat as opposed to losing muscle. And, because if you're a little bit on the heavy side as a marathon runner and like you're running pretty well and things are feeling pretty good, great, right? And if you start to lose mass, but you're losing muscle too, you're actually losing the thing that's powering you through the marathon. So that's not an awesome trade-off, right? We don't want to lose muscle mass in addition to losing body fat. So there are some really good reasons to lose body fat. Again, one, we have like general health concerns. Two, because we are competitive and we want to get to within a competitive range of body fat or of body physique types. And again, depending on your sport, these can be really, really different. Also, because we want to reduce the inflammation in the system so that tissues recover faster, so that our joints feel better, both chemically in terms of markers and inflammation, but then also mechanically, because there's simply less pounding, there's less wear and tear on the joints if there's less body mass. Of course, we can also take that way too far. For me, I have no desire to be at 140 pounds. Like, would there be less load on my joints? Absolutely. But that would be actually giving up a degree of strength that I'm not okay with. And the strength that has been really protective for me from knee injuries and back injuries and like kind of dealing with back injuries. If I were to take that much mass off, yeah, I'd lose some body fat. I'd also be losing a lot of muscle, which would put my back at risk once again, right? And that's a trade-off that I'm just not willing to make. So there are a couple of ideas about, some of our myths about body fat and some ways of thinking like, do you truly need to walk this journey? So let's just say that you've decided that you do want to walk this journey, that you do need to for whatever reason. I want to give you really 3 big rules to keep in mind as you walk this path. The first one is the timing of a fat loss phase. I implore you, please, 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 do not think of dieting as something that you do as a lifestyle or for the long haul. Diets work best if we take it as a tool for a limited period of time, 6, 8, 12 weeks, right? The same way that we might jump into a program, like this is what I do with Powder Strong, with Strong to Endure, my running program, right? These are 12-week programs that are intended to get you moving, get you started, get you strong, give you a basis, give you some information, give you a structural and endurance foundation that you can then build from and work from. And you could run these programs again, right? And you could always run a diet again. But taking a really focused approach to diet, to losing some body fat over the course of a couple of months, and then taking a month in a maintenance phase, or at least a couple of weeks in a maintenance phase, and then maybe reapproaching the diet or going into the next phase of training, this is going to work much better for us. Sustained long-term diets, we tend to fail. And it does mean that we may not lose as much body fat in that 2-3 month period as we would like to. But we want that fat to stay off, right? We want the diet to be a short-term fix for a long-term improvement in health and improvement in movement quality. So again, keep it to a period of time. And so when we do that diet is also really important. If you are, just as an example, right? If you are looking at a marathon and you have a marathon that is, say, 3 months out, and at this point you've signed up for the marathon, you've already put in some half marathons, maybe you've even run a marathon before, and you're like, okay, I've got 3 months to train for this marathon, and I want to lose some body fat because there's also this wedding coming up, and I want to look really good. Or I've always run my marathons at 175, and I wonder what it'd like to feel like to run a marathon at 165. So I'm going to try to lose, 10-ish pounds of body fat. Cool. So here's what one could do. We could actually say, I'm going to lose weight across the full 3 months of training for the marathon, right? I'm going to try to lose 3 pounds, 3.5 pounds per month up to the marathon. Well, here's the problem. In order to lose body fat, in order to lose muscle or to lose body mass, we have to be in a caloric deficit. We, by definition, have to be burning more calories than we're taking in. And calories count. They're not everything, but they do matter. You can't get around this concept. There's a lot of other variables and factors in play. But if you're in a calorie deficit for that month before the marathon, because you're still trying to lose body fat, how is that marathon going to feel? In fact, just think of how your long runs are going to feel when you're always in a caloric deficit. It is going to be mentally really taxing. Dieting is mentally taxing. There's a lot of willpower that goes into this. So training for a marathon at the same time as you're trying to lose 3 pounds a month is really problematic because your discipline is going to be split. Your energy level is going to be low because of the diet, especially when you're in that last third, that last month of the diet. Before you would come off it, it's a harder time. So what if we were to change this paradigm and we say, look, if you're 3 months out from a marathon, could you lose 10 pounds in 12 weeks and do it safely and keep the weight off? Probably. Should you do it at the same time as training for a marathon? I'm just going to say no. What would be more realistic might be to say okay, I run my last marathons at 175, and I'm going to I want to run this one at 170, 172. So we're now talking 3 to 5 pounds of weight loss. Well, now we're in the place where doing that in 4 or 6 weeks could be reasonable. This could be doable. And it actually could work well with marathon training because the beginning of your marathon training is probably going to be a lot of base work. You're going to be building base endurance. You're just going to be putting in some long miles. And those miles are going to be hard, but you don't have to move them particularly fast. We're trying to put in volume of time on the feet. And and it's okay to be tired when you do that because you're not pushing very hard. But so if your first month of training for the marathon is pure endurance, that's a really nice time to be putting in some fat loss effort. Then as you increase the intensity of training for the marathon, you have to be able to recover from those workouts. If you can't recover from a workout, the workout didn't do you any good. But if you're in a caloric deficit, what's really hard to do? To recover super well. So we have to balance these two goals out, right? If we really want to run that marathon 10 pounds down from the last marathon, we should probably be talking about a 6-month plan, right? Where the first 3 months, we're going to be doing the fat loss work. We're going to be doing a little bit of base endurance training. We're probably going to be doing some strength training because strength training is going to be incredibly helpful for fat loss and also ensuring we maintain muscle mass. Come back to that idea in a second. And so we have that 3-month window to lose some body fat. And then we actually go all of our marathon training, we're actually aiming to maintain our body weight, which is a really good thing because your marathon training is going to be hard. It's going to be intense. Some days are hard days. Some days are just long days. But there's a lot of grueling work that's got to get done. And that work has to be fed so that you can recover from it and do the next workout well and feel great for that marathon. So in fact, when you're in that the 3 months of focus training on the marathon, because you spent 3 months on diet, for those 3 months focused on training on the marathon, what do? You do regular weigh-ins. And if you start losing weight, you eat a little bit more. And if you start gaining weight, you eat a little bit less. Again, you take a look at water consumption and salt consumption, sleep quality, all of these factors can play in. But if the goal is to maintain a steady body weight, well then, check the body weight and that it's fairly steady. Cool, so there's our marathon example. Let me give you another example that is more kind of timely right now, right? And this is related to Powder Strong. So Powder Strong is a 3-month program that I run. It's 12 weeks. We have classes at the gym. We have online options as well. And with that 3-month program, we break it into 3 distinct phases. And I'm telling you this just so that you can see where the plan goes and how diet and fat loss fits into this. So phase 1 is very much our base endurance building phase. It is a little bit of muscle hypertrophy work, as if we're trying to add mass to muscles, right? Trying to increase the cross-sectional area of muscles so that they can produce more force and do more work. And that's really, that's our focus for this first month. There's also a lot of skill development stuff and really learning how to lift well so we get super confident with these exercises and we can use them at higher rates of intensity later on in the program. Phase 2, we start building. We start going more into pure strength, lifting heavier loads for shorter sets. We start going more into performance endurance, so kind of pushing from zone 2 up into zone 3 on heart rate. And then the last phase, we're really getting into power and lactate buffering, lactate clearing, right? How long can you go while your legs are burning, and then how fast can that burning subside? Well, here's the problem. In phase 3, power and phase 2 strength, both of those rely on having a lot of recovery resources available to make huge gains. If your brain is worried about the fuel that's available because you're in a caloric deficit, you're not going to get as much out of the strength work as you possibly could. The strength work and especially the power work in phase 3, these are going to leave you feeling depleted. These are going to leave you feeling just rough, right? And that means that you do a workout on Monday and you're supposed to do the other workout on Wednesday or Thursday and you're oh, it's Wednesday. You're man, I feel like shit. I'm still I haven't recovered. My muscles feel fine, but my system just feels trashed. How good is the Wednesday workout going to be? It's going to be terrible. You'll be worse for doing it, right? And the problem wasn't the workout. The problem was the fueling strategies going into this. So if we're in a caloric deficit, man, that second power workout of the week is going to be terrible. So that's the wrong time to lose fat. But here's where we can lose fat. We can focus on fat loss in that first 4-week period, because within those 4 weeks, we're building strength, and we're building strength through muscle endurance training and muscle hypertrophy training. And in fact, if you eat in a little bit of a caloric deficit, what'll happen is your brain's going to get really good at using those muscles. It's going to maintain the muscle mass that's being used, because the brain is an efficiency system. The brain basically says okay, you're eating a little bit less food than usual. I'd like a little bit more, but there's enough for me to feel comfortable. So we're going to burn off a little bit of the body fat, and you're training these muscles. So those muscles are obviously important to survival. So I'm not going to scrap those muscles. I'm going to scrap body fat instead, which is exactly what we want, right? So in that first phase, when we're training base endurance, we're training muscular hypertrophy and muscular endurance, and we're building skills, it is a phenomenal time to live in a little bit of a caloric deficit, right? Eat a little bit less than you need and lose the body fat then, and then aim to keep your body weight stable for the next 2 phases. Because again, if you're in that strength phase and you're losing body fat, you're losing weight, and unless you've got access to really high-end equipment, it's hard to track exactly whether it was muscle or fat that was being lost. But if you're losing weight in the second and third phases, you're probably not eating enough to recover well. So again, if we're training for performance, we got to make sure the recovery is on point. We can do both at the same time, but it's also it's usually going to happen in a base phase or in this general preparedness phase. It's kind of getting ready for everything else. Great. So there's our timing thing. Second up, here, I want to say it again. Calories really matter. you need to be in a caloric deficit to lose body mass. And if you are training while you're in a caloric deficit, if you're doing resistance training in a caloric deficit, you are more likely to lose body fat. Again, the brain, the human system, I mean, all living organisms work on the concept of efficiency. Just because you're like, man, I'm going to eat a little bit less, but I really don't want to lose any muscle. I just want to lose fat. Like, just because you thought that, that's not enough of a signal to the system to make that to happen. So, we can think of this as like really, really great endurance athletes tend to not be very well developed in like the chest and shoulders. They tend to not to have like huge upper bodies. And part of that is that they're eating a certain volume of food and they're spending their time moving on their legs. So their brain, the systematic response is, okay, that's what's most important right now. Like we'll actually break down some of the muscle tissue from the shoulder because we're so prioritizing what's happening in the legs. And so a marathoner might lose a whole bunch of upper body mass through their training season and then hopefully get that back. And could they maintain that? Yes, but it's going to require some effort and more effort for upper body than most marathoners put into place. I try to actually get people to buck that trend because it's not a ton of work, but it's a little bit of work and it will actually make you stronger and healthier in the long run. So when we're training in a caloric deficit, we need to be doing resistance training so that we don't lose body, or so that we don't lose muscle mass, so that we're primarily losing body fat. The second piece is that the foods that we eat truly matter. We need to be eating enough protein to maintain that muscle mass, especially if we're doing a lot of resistance training. So the place to cut down calories is often going to be from fats and from carbs, not from protein, because protein, like your body, your liver can actually take other things and make new fats. Your liver can take other things and make new carbohydrates. It can like turn a fat or a protein into a carb. It can turn a carb or a protein into a fat, but it cannot create new proteins because there's an amino acid backbone to those chemical chains. So we have to take in protein. It is an essential nutrient. We have to take this in, and it becomes the building block for all the structures in the body. So if we are taking in enough protein and we are doing resistance training and we are in a slight caloric deficit, well, that's actually that's kind of the golden concept for how we get performance-related fat loss. So we don't lose muscle mass, or at least minimize the loss of muscle mass, because we're taking in the protein, we're doing the resistance training, we're stimulating those adaptations. But we are in a caloric deficit, which is putting the system into a little bit of stress, and we're going to get that as a fat utilization, right? We're going to get that as fat loss. And again, this works really well in short durations of time. The other consideration here is just of food quality overall, right? Unprocessed foods, fruits, veggies, things that looked like they did when they were alive. Protein, things that had faces tend to be, or could have had faces, tend to be the best high quality sources of protein in a pure protein way. A lot of the protein sources that we use for people who are on a plant-based diet also carry with them a lot of carbs, a lot of starches. And so to hit adequate protein levels without taking in a whole bunch of energy from carbs, it can be really challenging. Like black beans are a great example. Like I know from the time that I spent eating plant-based, like black beans I love black beans, like love black bean burritos. Like this is really good stuff. And yes, there's a whole bunch of protein there, but that protein is really eclipsed by the volume of carb, and it can make fat loss hard in the get enough protein, but pull calories down a little bit if we're reliant on some of these plant-based things. It's possible. We just have to we have to get a little bit more creative than we would if we have a meat-based or a meat-inclusive diet. So food quality matters. Here is your third big rule, and this is about the rate of weight loss, to put this in perspective. And you'll notice here again, I'm saying weight loss as opposed to fat loss because it is really hard to independently measure just pure amount of fat loss. You could do this with like a biannual or a quarterly or even a yearly, like some sort of a scan, a DEXA scan, a BOD pod or something. You could also do this with a pair of calipers, with a coach. I do this for folks. You can always do this at home and have a spouse use a pair of calipers on you. But it's really hard to measure pure body fat, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about body mass loss. And when we're in a diet phase, our body mass loss should be somewhere between 0.5% to 1% of body weight per week. And that's kind of on the upper end. So what this would mean is for a 200-pound human, 1% is 2 pounds a week, right? And that adds up. Like that's fairly substantial loss. If you're smaller, if you're 120 pounds, it might be closer to that 0.5%, which is, again, going to be about, like in the realm of, 1.75 pounds or something a week. Like 1 to 2 pounds a week of fat loss or of body mass loss tends to be pretty sustainable, and higher rates than that, like we're more likely to rebound. Again, it doesn't sound like a lot. And if you've got 20 pounds of fat loss, the fat that you want to lose, you're like, oh, it's going to take 10 weeks. Like, yeah, it's going to be a long 10 weeks. And you might even break that 10 weeks into 2 chunks, right? Do half of it now, take a month off, like do the rest of your training, and then like go again at it. But again, the goal here isn't just like dropping the body fat as fast as we possibly can, because if we do that, we're going to see the decline in performance. And that's exactly what we're not after, right? Because we are entering into this whole conversation on the understanding that health matters, and the belief, at least for me, and I hope you share this one, that optimal performance comes with optimal health. And you could have, can people perform optimally without very good health? Absolutely. Like we see this within like certain Olympic athletes. We see this within certain communities. But is that really where we want to be? For me, I think the answer is no, right? The long-term health is at least as important as my performance this particular ski season, because I want to be able to do this for a really long time, right? So there's a balance there. There's a little bit of a give and take, and that's something that's up to each of us to decide. So guys, that is everything. Thank you for tuning in. If you have questions, comments, things you want to talk about, any number of ways to get a hold of me. You can hit reply to an email, send me a message in the Asymptote Tribe Facebook group, or if you're in Powder Strong or Strong to Endure in any of my other programs, then drop a comment in the Asymptote Circle, and we'll keep this conversation going. Thanks so much. Have a great day.